Well, good afternoon, everybody. I didn't get a chance to see how many people we have here, but I know we had a pretty good big group last time. So thank you guys again for having me back. So as Ms. Lee was saying, I am a licensed clinical social worker. That means that I went to grad school to get my master's in social work and then did a bunch of supervised clinical hours, took a really gnarly exam, passed that to become licensed. And as you'll see in my title, I've also got PPSC, which means I have a credential to work in schools. So I am a therapist privately, and I also work for Newport Mesa Unified School District as a school social worker for them. So I'm here today to talk to you guys about mental health. And I guess before I jump in, just a few really quick notes about me so you kind of know where I come from. Like I said, I had to get my master's when I went to school. Oh, you guys get to see that lovely little ladder in the back of my obviously really well decorated office. So I went to grad school, went to UCLA to get that master's, went to Northwestern to get my undergrad. And I basically chose this profession because my original plan, which was to become a musician, it did not go the way that I had planned. Loved it as somebody who could play music, but realized that wasn't really the path for me professionally. So turned to getting to figure out how I could help support people, which is something that I really love to do. And that's why I am here where I am today. Worked a bunch of years in community mental health in South LA and have worked privately for a number of years as well. So I guess my main takeaway from the last meeting that we had was that you guys as a group had a lot of really good questions. So I have my presentation and I'm definitely able to give a lot of information if you guys want it, but I thought maybe we'd start off with a question that I have for you guys to kind of see where you guys are at and set the tone. And then as we're talking, please send whatever questions you have. And I'm just making sure that I have the chat function up so that I can see any questions. Okay. So I guess the first question that I would ask you guys is take a moment, today we're talking about mental health. So take a moment and imagine, if you imagine a person with mental illness, what do you see? And this is not something, this is a rhetorical question, by the way, you don't have to answer in the chat function. If you want to give me feedback, that's great, you don't need to. But imagine this person, what do they look like? How old are they? Are they any specific gender? What are they wearing? What are they doing? Just kind of take a moment and sit with that when you think of somebody with mental illness. Oh, and yes, if you guys want to tell me your name and what school and grade you're in, that'd be awesome. Thank you, Ben Curtis. So I don't know about you guys, but I think a lot of times when people imagine somebody with mental illness, they imagine a lot of the extremes. They imagine someone who's homeless. They imagine somebody who is disheveled, someone who is maybe really angry. They might imagine this person being like in a corner in the dark, sitting by themselves. They might imagine somebody who is cutting, somebody who is in the hospital. These are a lot of the images that mental health looks like in terms of the way it's portrayed in the media, the way that we see it a lot in social media, the way that people talk about it in books, movies. And yes, sometimes that is what mental illness looks like. A lot of times that is what more severe mental illness looks like. However, we also know that 20% of teens have some sort of mental disorder. We know that mental illness can affect any age. We know that typically we start to see symptoms of mental illness in the teen years into early 20s. We also know that a lot of people living with mental illness are very high functioning. So mental illness does not just affect a certain population. It's really all over. And given the statistics that we have, and this is just of those cases that we actually know of, that means like a good fifth or good fourth to fifth of our population is living with mental illness. So that means that people that you guys know, people in your everyday lives, that you likely have one, if not a few people who are dealing with some significant issues. So I guess I want to start with, first of all, just normalizing that this is an issue that is very prevalent in our society worldwide. It's something that is not very well understood even now. I think our media is doing a better job of portraying what mental illness looks like and the wide range of it, everything from dealing with significant stressful events in life to dealing with full-blown, really, really severe mental illness diagnoses. And that luckily nowadays we have a lot of research, a lot of resources available to help people on the whole spectrum of mental health. So there's that. And then I think today we're also talking about just how to maintain one's mental health and well-being. I don't think that it takes having a diagnosable disorder to get support for mental health. Mental health is something that is part of our everyday lives and something that you guys are going to need as you are embarking into your future as young adults, right? So that's, first of all, just kind of an introduction. Like I said, if you guys have questions, I will take them as we go, and we don't need to wait to the Q&A. So I'll keep an eye on that. If you guys have any questions, please send them over. Since no one has yet sent anything, I'm just going to go ahead and cover a couple topics for you guys, okay? So let's see. Here we go. Okay. So I have a slide for that. That's right. Forgot. Okay. So really quick, just about things that you should know about this field. It's been an honor and a privilege to be in this field because you, as a therapist, as a social worker, in a lot of the different positions that we can hold as social workers and mental health workers, we are tasked with supporting people who are vulnerable. A lot of times people who have a lot of like layers of stress, systemic issues that are troubling them. And so it's an honor to be able to step into someone's life, be trusted with some really private and personal information, and to be able to sit with them and to figure out how to move forward with that. I think one of the really interesting things about our field as well is that it gives us as the helpers to also do a lot of self-reflection. I am challenged every single day in my work in terms of checking my own biases and checking how I am responding to my clients. It brings up my own stuff. This is in a process that we call transference and countertransference, which is feelings that a client can be imposing onto me, maybe feelings that they have about their parent, have about their friend, about their significant other, that is coming out in our interactions, and then the vice versa could be happening as well, where because we're human and because we have emotions, and even as therapists we have those, we may find ourselves imposing certain feelings, beliefs onto a client. And so that is constant work that we're doing in trying to check ourselves and learn more from the process. Kind of related to the question that I asked earlier, stigma is still a very, very real problem for us. I think that, like I said, when media is doing a little bit of a better job of portraying mental illness in a realistic way and not just making it this big scary thing that makes everybody afraid of people who have a mental illness. And so one thing I would just say about that is, you know, I think that especially as we're having these racial discussions in our country, it's important that we check, do we have certain stigmas and certain generalizations that we're making about groups of people that make it easier for us to either villainize them or to criticize them or to somehow push them away. And, you know, I think that as much as we're talking about doing that with racial groups, that happens with other groups as well, whether it's LGBTQ or if it's mental illness or even socioeconomic groups, religious groups. So I think those are things that we constantly are having to evolve as people. So, by the way, for you guys, just a couple like examples of, I think, realistic uses of portraying mental illness that I've seen in the media are This Is Us. So they do talk about and portray anxiety, depression, and they talk about it in a multi-generational way as well. Multi-generational mental illness is a big thing because what we find is that a lot of times when there are unresolved issues in an older generation, unbeknownst to the older generation and to the younger generation, a lot of times it's passed on because we see a lot of learned behaviors. We see a lot of added stress in the home environment when families are not addressing their mental health. And so it's actually very common to see what we call multi-generational illness. I haven't seen this one, but I've heard really good things. You're the Worst on Hulu, which looks at depression. Please Like Me is also an Australian comedy, which is apparently a good one. And Jessica Jones does a good portrayal of PTSD. So just a couple, if you guys want any more TV to watch. I personally miss TV because I have children and I don't get to watch it anymore because I'm too tired at the end of the day. And I get to watch Winnie the Pooh during the day if I get to watch anything. Other things related to stigma, I know that as in terms of media and celebrities, like a lot of people just who are in the public eye, a lot of people are trying to speak up more about mental illness. And so a couple people that I might be dating myself, but a couple people I think you guys know who talk about mental illness and their experience with it. Adele has spoken out about her experience with depression. Ryan Reynolds has spoken about his experience with anxiety. I know I'd read something about how he was extremely anxious when it came to Deadpool and the release of that movie. Demi Lovato has spoken very openly about her experience with depression, bipolar disorder, her eating disorders, and substance use. Emma Stone has also talked about panic attacks. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has talked about depression, and Nicki Minaj has shared about her experiences having suicidal thoughts. So again, just another example of how prevalent mental health issues are. And I think one of the biggest issues is we are not talking about it enough. Not that we need to put everybody's junk out there, not that we have to say that, oh, if you have a little bit of anxiety, everybody has mental illness, right? No, yes, everybody will experience stress. Everybody will go through their ups and downs. That does not mean that you have a mental illness. It means that perhaps, we need to figure out ways to better cope with stress. But there are there are, like I said, there's like a big range of what mental health issues can look like. And I think the goal is to make sure that it is managed to the point that it is not getting out of control or becoming too damaging to a person. Another thing that you should know about this field is there's always a need. I think I spoke about this last time. I don't believe that robots will ever be able to take our place, because there's something very genuine and unique about human contact, about that really genuine relationship that you can have with a person. So there are lots of job opportunities in this field. So some of the most commonly addressed issues in mental health that specifically with teens. So just real quick, I put up there on the corner the National Suicide Hotline. This is a free hotline that I think is good for anybody to have on hand, whether for yourself, for a loved one, for a friend. It is a free and confidential line that is open 24/7. And they have trained professionals who are there to speak with anybody who is really struggling with issues of, having thoughts of wanting to harm themselves, wanting to kill themselves. And they've done great work in helping people of all ages. So just something that I would encourage you guys all just to have. There are a lot of other hotlines as well that are more like specific to teens and things, and I have some of those resources, and I believe they are on the Heads Up Buttercup website as well, in our Q&A. So just want to speak really quickly about some of the really common issues that I see in the teens that I work with. Anxiety. So anxiety is a really big term because it can cover a lot of different things. Anxiety can mean either just dealing with the stress of school. I do not envy you guys as a generation, because I thought school was hard when I was in high school, and the things that you guys are dealing with now in terms of the academic expectations and just how things are looking for us as a country too. I feel for you. I know that it is a really hard situation that you're in. And so I think a lot of times, part of it is culture-based, part of it is just how your family looks at, what things should look like for you after high school. There's a lot of anxiety about being in the workforce, about going to college, about even finishing high school and getting into the right job or right school. So I see a lot of students who struggle with that pressure, a lot of that pressure that they put on themselves, that they feel from school, that they feel from adults in their lives, and a lot of fear. So kind of related to that, and we'll go more specifically into COVID later, but I know that there is a lot of anxiety for students just around what are things going to look like when we get back in the fall? I haven't been able to see my friends in 6 months. So what's happening? What am I going to do? How am I going to manage like this? So anxiety can look like that. Anxiety can look like panic attacks. I know that we've had a couple questions about panic attacks. So basically, panic attacks are basically like a time where a person feels completely out of control. They have a lot of the symptoms that a person can have are difficulty breathing, difficulty focusing, a feeling of disconnect from their bodies. Some people even kind of black out in a panic attack, partly from like the hyperventilating, and also partly just from like the emotional, like overwhelming feel of that. And so I've had lots of students who have experienced panic attacks, and sometimes they are a one-time thing. Sometimes they are things that are happening almost every hour. And so, figuring out, is this something that is a problem for me, is definitely something, to look at the frequency, look at the intensity of it. Was there a particular trigger? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. So that is also kind of under the category of anxiety. Also Also, it's technically not under the same category anymore, but in the past, PTSD has been related to the anxiety category. PTSD can be something that comes about either from a very traumatic experience where somebody's safety was put at risk, or it can be from a really major change, sometimes from a major loss. People have experienced PTSD from experiencing a person's death, or experiencing just a loss of somebody in their life. So there are lots of things about anxiety that we can talk about. And if anybody has any more specific questions, feel free to ask. Depression is another big one. So depression, I think, first of all, one of the things that I want to clear up is, for a lot of people, when they imagine somebody with depression, they imagine the crying all day, every day, looking sad, looking melancholy, having no energy, not eating. And yes, those are a lot of the classic symptoms of depression. However, there are also, like I mentioned before, a lot of people who are very high functioning and experience mental health issues. So depression can look like being very irritable. It can be difficulty sleeping or sleeping too much. It can be being really angry and very on edge. And so those are actually more of the symptoms that we see typically in adolescence. So that's a little bit about what depression looks like. And then obviously related to that is suicide. So for example, suicidal behaviors and thoughts can vary, and they can really range as well. Suicide, just because someone is doing kind of like suicidal or self-harming behaviors, doesn't necessarily mean that they want to die. I have had lots of clients who have self-harmed, and they tell me that this is actually a way that they cope. They don't know any other way to get rid of the painful feeling or to relieve some of the stress that they have. And so we have to work on coping, on figuring out other support systems. But the danger with that is that self-harming can get to a place where it becomes more harmful even without the intention. So there's self-harm, and then there is also actual suicidal intent and thoughts. And those can be anywhere from passive thoughts that somebody has, and it can become, all the way to actually having a plan and going through with a plan. I see some questions. So what's the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack? I think those actually might be the same thing from my understanding, just different names. So basically a panic attack is this kind of like uncontrolled time when somebody, sorry, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, which I'm clearly not great at multitasking. So the panic attack is usually like a time of heightened anxiety. So my understanding is that they are the same. Second question is, what really is good mental health, and when does the line between healthy pain cross over into depression? Good question. So I think like I'd mentioned earlier, everyone is going to have ups and downs, and it's a normal part of life. We're all going to have times where we feel like we're unraveling. We're all going to have times where we feel like things are all not in our control, especially in times like this, like COVID. We are all going to have times where we feel like a failure and where we feel like things are falling apart. That doesn't necessarily mean that your mental health is bad or that you don't have a good way of coping. It just means that you are human and that you are living through the ups and downs of life, and that you are not just some extremely, extremely privileged person who has had the good grace of not being able to experience any adversity in your life, which I don't believe there's any person in the world who is actually that person. I think the key is, how do we learn to manage the ups and downs of life? Do you have the tools to deal with the regular stresses that happen, to deal with conflicts that happen in your relationships? Do you have the right support system to help you through things like that? I think that's when a person is in a healthy place. Now, when I think the time to become more concerned and to figure out maybe it's time to reach out for help is, are the things that I'm experiencing, the sadness, the difficulty sleeping, the binge eating, the the thoughts of suicide, all of those things, are these things that are impacting my ability to function? Is it impacting my ability to do school? Is it impacting my relationships? And not in the sense that you just have, like I said, your normal ups and downs, your regular struggles, but more like, am I failing my classes? Am I suddenly having the urge to not go to school and all of a sudden missing a ton of school? Am I losing all of my friends and not able to confide in anybody? Am I having suicidal thoughts regularly? Am I starting to think about plans and how to actually do it? These are signs that it's a good time to ask for help. And I think that, if, like, for example, one of the things that people tell me is, like, I'll have parents tell me, well, my teen is just really irritable and just doesn't seem happy anymore. One of my first questions in my head is, okay, is this just kind of normal adolescent development? Because, you guys are going through a lot of changes as you're getting older, as you are taking on more responsibilities, and as you're preparing for the next stage in your life. So part of that can be normal. Part of that can be the pandemic that we're in. Part of it can be some of just the temperature of the country right now. But other questions to ask are, is it that is there nothing that makes them happy anymore? Are they actually able to reach out to anybody as a support? Do they feel like they are walking through life in a fog and that they're just kind of going through the motions without really experiencing what they're doing? So those are some of the things that I look for in trying to figure out, is this just normal life or is there something more significant happening? I hope I answered that sufficiently. I have another question. What is something comforting or appropriate to say to someone, to support someone who is vulnerable and struggles with self-confidence? And how do you prevent someone else's problems from becoming your own? Yeah, those are really good questions. So to address the first one, what's something comforting or appropriate to say to somebody when they are vulnerable and they're struggling with self-confidence? I think just when you are supporting anyone who is struggling, there are certain things that you can say and that I would avoid saying. So one of the biggest things that I think we struggle with in addressing people's mental health is allowing people to feel safe to actually talk about it. And I think that a lot of times, even when we're very well intentioned, even when we are trying to uplift somebody and help them to feel supported, that we somehow shut down the conversation or make a person feel really unsafe. And that is totally by accident. So I have a couple examples of things that I would say are helpful and some things that are not so helpful. So saying, thank you for sharing that with me. I think just, if you don't know what to say, if you feel like you have to come up with some comforting words, saying less is actually better than saying more. Because I think, and I have done this, I have made this mistake many times, where you think you have to make this person feel better and you just end up saying something that actually hurts them and makes them feel like, okay, I can't actually talk about this with this person anymore. Saying, is there anything that I can do to help? Just offering to be there. Saying, I'm sorry to hear that, that must be so tough. Just because you want to be there for your friend does not mean that you have to fully understand what they're going through. It does not mean that you have to feel what they're feeling. It does not mean that you have to have any answers for them. And a lot of times when people are asking for help, they're not necessarily looking for that. They're looking for someone to listen, someone to hear them without judgment, someone to not interrupt them, someone to just kind of hold them in the moment. I can't imagine what you're going through. Just as simple as that. I'm here for you when you need me. We'll get through this together. I think the main message through all of this is I'm here for you. I do not judge you, and it's going to be okay. Things to avoid. Some of these are things that people sometimes say because they're trying to be helpful. Sometimes they're things that people say because they just don't understand. I've heard this one a lot. What do you have to be depressed or anxious about? I've had a lot of adults say this to their kids. You know, a lot of adults who will say, and a lot of well-intentioned adults, I think, who feel that, you know, I hear this from a lot of immigrant families as well, where the intention is, you know, we have worked so hard to bring you to this country, or for us to come to this country and to set up a life for you that would give you so many more opportunities, give you a leg up to help you be successful, so that you know, you can be happy and we'll all be so happy and proud. So, you know, compared to what I went through, you know, what in the world do you have to be depressed about? And like I said, I think that comes from a well-intentioned place, because, you know, the whole goal was, as somebody who is here to support you and has helped try to set up things to help you in your life, you know, we have tried to avoid anything to give you any extra stress. But I think, you know, kind of like we had talked about with different people who have mental illness, mental illness does not discriminate between any race, age group, ethnic group, gender, socioeconomic status. It does not discriminate. And so one person's experience is unique, and it is something that needs to be understood and empathized with to help them. Something else people say, you'll be fine, just deal with it, or it's going to be over, just deal with this one problem, when it may not necessarily be related to a particular problem. Snap out of it, heard that a lot. We've all been there. So here's one that is, again, well-intentioned, trying to say, I'm empathizing with you. Yeah, we've all felt that way. When in fact, all that does is kind of, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It basically says to the person that your feelings are not unique. They're not important. Therefore, you know, there's really no reason for you to be so upset, or it's just going to pass. Pull yourself together. Just, you know, feeling like, okay, you know, everybody struggles. You got to just pull it together to get through this one thing. Make sure you get those grades. Make sure you get past that test. And maybe, yeah, that's appropriate sometimes. Maybe we just do need to be reminded, okay, this is just a struggle in the moment, but a lot of times that's not really helpful. Another well-intentioned one, you should be more positive, or here's some advice that I have. Unless the person is asking you for your advice, a lot of times it's not really welcome, because that's not what that person is looking for. So there are some pointers. How do you prevent someone else's problems from becoming your own? That's a really good one. And I think we talked in the last webinar about the importance of boundaries. Boundaries, and also making sure that you and your loved ones have a robust support system. So one thing that I'll say first of all is, while it's so great and really a compliment to you if a person comes to you sharing their pain, I think that really says something, first of all, about your relationship, and that the person sees you as a safe person to go to. At the same time, that does not mean that you have to be the only person to support this person. Especially when you're dealing with someone who has really significant depression, suicidal thoughts. Being the only person available can be so exhausting for you. It's really unfair to you also, because you have your own stuff, your own stress, your own life to deal with. And it's really not fair to them either, because what if they really need you in a moment and for whatever reason you're not available? if they don't have anyone else to go to, they're just kind of left out there on their own. So it's important that, you know, and this, it may not happen right away, but building a good support system of people who can be there is really important. Secondly, I think checking yourself on your boundaries. So, for example, I've had clients who'll say, you know, my best friend is going through, you know, having lost their dad right now, and they're really, really struggling, and I want to be there for them. But you know what? I'm also dealing with my own grief from my own passing of my dad. And I don't know how to be there for them, because whenever they talk about their dad, I'm thinking about my dad. And that's a time where I have to remind them, you know what? This might be a time where you have to say, I love you and I want to be there for you. I'm sorry I can't be there for you in this particular situation, but just know that I am loving you, even though I can't be there right now. So there are times where you might have to say that to somebody that you care about. And really, it's the most loving thing that you can do for them. Because if you know that you are crossing boundaries that are too much for you, then you're not able to really be there for them as a friend, right? Secondly, I think another thing to remember is, like, I know that I don't know if somebody asked a question about this in the last webinar or not, but I talked about having a friend who has suicidal thoughts. And I think in those situations, you know, the fear, and I get it, being in your situation is, you know, my friend shared this information with me, they are trusting me with this, and they don't want me to say anything to anybody. And so breaking that trust is going to be such a violation, right? I think that, again, this comes to the boundaries. It also comes back to the idea of having a good support system. You don't want to be the only person who is available when somebody is really struggling. And I think at the end of the day, even if your friend is upset with you for sharing some of that information with a parent or another trusted adult, at the end of the day, typically what we find is once that person starts to get the right help, they're actually very grateful, because they realize that they really needed it, that they needed somebody else to know who could help. And so I would just encourage you, you know, I think it's really the kindest thing to do, to make sure that that person is well supported.
So I have a question. So I don't know if this has been like asked in a previous webinar or like or whatever it is. So what is how would you say how important the role of like a relationship is in helping alleviate like mental illness?
The role of a relationship?
Yeah, like say friendships or like maybe parents or something like that.
Oh, like, are you saying is it more effective to get support from like a parent or a friend as opposed to a stranger?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I think that trust and having the relationship is key. That does not mean that building that kind of trust and relationship is not possible with somebody new, like a therapist, a school counselor, a teacher. I think that going to the people that are within your immediate trusting circle first is great, is best, and then figuring out whether or not that support system is sufficient. I would also say that not everybody has that trust within their immediate circle of friends or family. And so, you know, a lot of times in those cases, people will, you know, students will reach out to another trusted adult at school. Sometimes it's a coach, sometimes it's a teacher, a school counselor, or another mental health professional at school. And sometimes it's reaching out to like a hotline to speak to somebody and then get connected. But I think that even more emphasizes the idea that you have to have that level of trust first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Another question. I've heard people around me use the term seasonal depression. Is seasonal depression real, or is it just sadness correlating to the events that happened during that time, like finals and midterms? I know, who isn't depressed during finals and midterms? So sorry. I remember the day I took my last final or turned my last paper in, I was like, thank the Lord, I never have to do this again. So my understanding of seasonal depression is more of like, it's more of like how the environment is impacting your mental health. And so, so I know that, for example, people talk about like that people who live in really cloudy, rainy places like Seattle have what they call have more depression symptoms than sunnier places like California. I don't know if that's actually true, but I have heard of people using more homeopathic um, um, interventions like the UV lights and things during seasons, even like in California, where it is a little bit more gloomy and rainy. So I can't speak to whether or not that is real or not, but I will say that some people do find a correlation between the seasons and their symptoms. I think it's also true that kind of like we talked about before, that your ups and downs of your moods will go with whatever is happening in your life, right? I think it's fair to say that everybody is probably a little bit more depressed during COVID. I can say that myself. I am definitely feeling more irritable, more tired, more drained. So I think that is pretty normal. But again, coming back to, are these just normal ups and downs with the regular stress of life? And are these things that I am able to manage, or are they significantly impacting my ability to function in the different areas of my life? I have heard that using ice with red dye on your wrist is a good coping mechanism when feeling like cutting. In your professional opinion, does that method work? So I have never had a client use that before. What I would say is, I think that everybody's way of coping is going to be unique. So I do realize that we've got like 10 minutes left. So I will speak really quick about coping. I think it's a very personal thing. We all have different ways of de-stressing, and I think that's the whole idea. Coping is figuring out what are things that help me to de-stress so that I can kind of reset and get back to doing what I need to do. Coping is something that we all do. So even from day to day, like I had 3 extra cookies yesterday, and that was my way of coping because my kid was driving me nuts. Is it turning everything off and just not having screen time so that you can just have a time to relax your mind? Is it watching is it, okay, I was gonna say 2 episodes because that sounds like a lot to me. Is it watching 5 episodes of your favorite show?
Make that 20.
Sorry?
Make it 20.
Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous, you guys. So like, yeah, I don't remember the last time I watched that much TV. So yeah, is it binge watching a show? And is that something that helps you reset? But also keep in mind, binge watching shows probably means that you're not sleeping very much. So if you're not getting very much rest, you're not going to be very well equipped to deal with difficult emotions, right? So maintain that balance, right? Coping can also be just checking in with yourself, giving your mind a break from dealing with all the other stress in your life. So some things that I know help a lot there are lots of apps out there that deal with mindfulness, that deal with just helping people to kind of check in and disconnect from the world. If you want, I can send the board over a list of these, but some really quick ones are Stop, Breathe, and Think, Insight Timer, the Mindfulness app, Headspace, and Calm. Those are some of my favorites that I know of and should be available on both whatever systems you guys use. Other techniques or other activities that I know people find really helpful are deep breathing. So I'm going to give you a really, really quick rundown of a very effective breathing technique. It's called 4-7-8. You breathe in really quickly for 4 seconds, you hold it for 7 seconds, you breathe out slowly for 8 seconds. By the way, the breathing in is through your nose, the breathing out is through your mouth. So breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold it for 7 seconds, breathe out slowly through your mouth for 8 seconds. This is a clinically proven breathing technique that helps to regulate your emotions and just kind of help pause everything. A lot of people love to write and journal. A lot of people write poetry. Exercise is a big one, basically because that helps, you know, increase your endorphins. It helps de-stress. Sometimes even just like hitting something really hard is a really good way to let stress out. If you don't have like a punching bag or something, pillows are really good ones. Just kind of like beat up your pillow.
Okay.
Sometimes a bath or shower is a great way to just kind of reset and help yourself calm. Cooking and baking, that's a good one that people like to help just take your mind off of things. Asking for support. Some people just need to talk things out. So if you are that kind of person, call up your favorite friend who loves to listen to you, and you know, that's a great way to cope. And I think another good one is establishing healthy boundaries. So it is okay to say, this is not something that I can deal with right now. It is okay to say, I care about you, I love you, I cannot be there for you with this particular situation, or I have a lot going on in my life and I need to deal with this first so that I can be there for you as a friend. It's okay to say that. Why is it significantly harder to get medical coverage for mental health issues compared to other body issues, like physical, I'm guessing physical ailments? So that's a good question, and one that I ask myself all the time. I think part of it is going back to that stigma of not being able to fully understand mental health. I think that there's a lot of polarization in how we look at mental health and wellness. And also, you know, if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, basic needs come first, right? You got to take care of your physical body. You got to make sure that you are healthy, that you are getting enough sleep and getting fed, and you have a roof over your head, all of those things, right? So I think that those things tend to come first because yes, if you want to take care of your mental wellness, your physical wellness has to come too, right? And like I'm sure lots of people are saying, you know, like with COVID, you have to be well if we want to get our economy up, if we want to live to do our jobs and all those things. So I think those do come primary usually. And also mental health issues, I think, are just a little bit more cloudy for a lot of people. A lot of people still have a hard time fully understanding all of the different types of diagnoses. They have a hard time identifying when there is a significant mental health issue. And a lot of it is so just objective in our experience that it's hard for people to just say, okay, well, you've got this symptom and this symptom, you've got this diagnosis, therefore I can give you this medication for it, and it's done, right? It's also hard to say like how many therapy sessions a person needs to get, you know, to be well again. So prescribing a certain number of sessions is harder than, say, prescribing a certain number of days of antibiotics, right? So it's a little bit less clear cut for a lot of people, which I think also adds to the issues. I've heard of the term smiling depression. What does it actually mean? That's a very good question. I don't know either, but my best guess would be a lot of people who are experiencing significant mental health issues are very good at covering it up. They are very high functioning. And I will say this about it too, that mental health is something that someone can be struggling with a lot and can be covering up and hiding their pain. It can also be something that people use to their advantage. So let me talk about that a little bit. So one is, I think because first of all, we have to get through life, right? Life continues to happen. There's no way to press pause on it. We have to find ways to get through. And some people cover up their symptoms in order to get through. A lot of times people are also afraid of being seen as like the negative Nancy, or just, oh, nobody wants to see me being depressed all the time. And so because there's a lot of that self-shaming about it, people cover it up. There's also a lot of shame just in terms of admitting that somebody has has a problem. And so coming into that is a challenge. And somebody, Eunice said, stigma is a term for someone living with depression on the inside while appearing perfectly happy or content on the outside. Their public life is usually one that's put together. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Eunice. So validating of you. So yeah, there you go. Thank you for summing it up so much more eloquently than I did. And I think on the other end, the other thing I would say too is that there are a lot of people who actually use their mental illness to their advantage. So for example, a lot of people who are what we call like obsessive compulsive or have obsessive compulsive personality disorder actually use that as a way to get ahead in their careers because they are so obsessive compulsive. They're extremely detail oriented, they are perfectionists, and that actually helps them to elevate themselves in their work. I think also people who have experienced some level of anxiety, depression, or any other mental illnesses, that actually gives you the experience and the empathy to support other people who have gone through that. So sometimes even just having that experience gives you the power to support other people, which I think is really lovely.